So today, we are going to start right off with our standards for OSCQR for this round. We're going to start with Section 3. Section 3 in OSCQR is mostly about formatting and layout and organization. So OSCQR 17 talks about large blocks of information divided into manageable sections, which we also call this chunking. We chunk the information. And we're really, when you start using Blackboard and you start putting text on the screen, we're really moving towards, MLA style, where we are not making continuous paragraphs one after the other. We're putting space between the paragraphs. And you can see here that I'm showing just a basic example that we've got a nice little space between. You can also put space in between your headings and your text. Very basic. Most people are doing this. There's not a lot to this. So here's when we start to get into a little bit of the more complicated 508 requirements. And one is a contrast between text and the background, so content can be easily viewed. We do have quite a few students in our population that have contrast issues. And it is a big flag for us in all of our courses, since we have this population of students with contrast issues, or students who have trouble and need to magnify. So it's really important that we make sure, and you've probably heard me 100 times, remove all your color from your course, from your text. And this is sort of the same thing. So we're going to talk a little bit detailed about this. And what I want to talk about is the contrast that we're looking for is 4.5 to 1. So anything higher than 4.5 to 1 is great. You can use it. It's a high contrast. The higher, the better. Lower than 4.51 is insufficient and fails any kind of contrast check. So I'm going to show you very quickly, just move towards that, where our contrast checker is. So right now, you'll have this link in the PowerPoint when I upload that. Right now, I have the contrast checker set to white text with a black background. And these numbers are called hexadecimal. You probably have seen them. They go from FFF to 0000000 and all combinations in between. We don't have to go into how they made these crazy hex numbers, but it's all based on, I think hexadecimal is based on 6 or 12. I can't remember. But you can see the contrast ratio here. This is the highest contrast ratio you can get, which is 21 to 1. So you can see right down here, it gives you a pass, right? So we're really, this is where we want to be most of the time. Even if I reverse this and put white, black foreground or black text, and with white, which is our Fs, oops, put one more, too much Fs. There we go. It's still that 21.1 ratio. Now, if I put anything else in here, which is like, let me think, A, which is a gray, you'll see that now we're at a 2.32 to 1 ratio, and that is too low. And now you can see here, you can see how light it is, and we have these fails. So when you're working with text with a background color, thank you, Kevin Crawford, based on 16. I could not remember what it was based on. Thank you. And what we really want to do is to make sure, and even when I go up and down here, you can see in order to get it to the 4.5, really is right about there. Is you can see that's sort of a rich, dark gray with the white background. So any lighter than that, really it's just too light. And you could see that here down here. And you can do that with any color. So if you do have an area where you are using color, especially in PowerPoints, you can find the actual hexadecimal, the hex number for these colors, put it right into this contrast checker, and it will tell you whether or not the contrast is good. So for this, and I'll switch back here, we know that highlighted text has enough contrast for us to read. However, highlighting the yellow behind the text actually is not good for other eye conditions, and that's why we don't recommend that. We also have a B-line reader that's available for students to use through the Ally Alternative Format button for any item or any file that you upload to Blackboard. And the B-line reader will help students, especially who have dyslexia. The B-line reader is designed to help them concentrate and follow the lines so that they can comprehend at a higher rate. So I have this basic little video here that actually walks through the created how to do required color contrast. But I think everybody can probably watch the video when they download the PowerPoint themselves. It's only about 2.5 minutes or so for this video, and it goes through and talks about what happens with pastels and when you're working with thin text, what happens with that contrast. Here's that link again to the contrast checker from WebAIM. I highly recommend WebAIM. You can also watch this video straight on YouTube. Next is a super easy one. Course is free of grammatical and spelling errors. Yay! That's a good one. We don't have to do anything else. Just about everybody's gone through their courses and fixed all their grammatic and spelling mistakes. And it's fine if you have one or two. Over time, people will point them out to you and you can fix them. Everybody's got this one. 321. Text is formatted with titles, headings, and other styles to enhance readability and improve structure of the document. So I've created a style sheet here. A lot of people get confused, especially if you've never been introduced to it before. So I'll upload this style sheet for you, and I'll pull it up right now so you can see it. In Word, and I've made a little style sheet for you. In Word, there is on the home, there is this style pane and style buttons. And this really goes back to XML and HTML, how we create text on web pages. So it really originates with that. And probably Kevin could probably give us a whole lecture on it. When you're working in a document, for accessibility, the document should contain headings and heading styles, which would help a student who may have vision problems navigate the document with a screen reader. So for a screen reader, the only way to sort of jump from one place in the document to the next is through headings. So if you don't have any headings, or you yourself are sort of bolding and changing the size number, someone who is blind will have a very, very difficult time navigating to where they actually want. Every time they want to find something in the document, they will have to listen to the whole thing in order to get where they want. So we need to have these headings, and a lot of people have never used this tool before. So I've opened up the little style pane so you can see it right here. In these documents, Word automatically comes with a set of standard default headings, and you can change these styles right in each one of them. If you download, you can modify those styles to something that you like. And so what you see here is the title, of course, is larger top of the screen. So that's where you're going to start. And then what we call regular paragraph text is called normal. And you can see that's normal side, meaning it's just a paragraph. And you can set up your paragraphs however you want with your spacing. We always start after the title with heading 1. So one of the things you can't do is put a heading 1 in and then jump to heading 3. In a document, you must go heading 1 to heading 2 to heading 3, or it'll flag. So it flags on a website. Our own website will flag you, as well as Ally will flag you that the headings are not in order. You may have seen that message come up before. And that's what it means. So heading 1 is usually you use for your large categories. Heading 2 is your subcategory. And then heading 3 and heading 4 are really about your details. I've also created a bulleted list style and a numbered list style. And you can see over there, here's your numbered list, and the bulleted list is probably somewhere else. Oh, there it is right here with the bulleted list. So we have these styles. When you save it default, every time you open up a new document, Word will start picking up these styles. And as default, you can make them default. And so every document you start will automatically give you all of these just the way you like them. And you can always set the spacing too. As you can see, heading 1 should have a lot of that spacing. It goes back to standard 317, where you're talking about blocks of text, breaking those up with a lot of space. And you can see heading 1 has a lot of space above and below. Heading 2 has a lot of the same space above, but I've shortened it with heading 2. And you can see heading 3, I've shortened above and below. And then heading 4 has a little above and nothing below. So you can really style, really make these styles the way you want them. When you go in to modify a style, you have all the regular stuff here. But if you go to format down here and choose paragraph, this is where you get to have your spacing before and after. You could automatically set it for 1.5 lines, which I like on PowerPoint slides. You can set your indentations automatically for your style so that your bullets automatically indent for you. So there's a lot of things you can set up here. There's also a lot of tabs, borders. You can set up your frames. You can set up your numbering. If you like to have, little diamonds instead of dots. So you can set all those styles up here. This is also needs to happen in Blackboard. Blackboard has 3 headings. It has heading 1, subheading 1, and subheading 2. So it gives you 3 headings. You can use those in Blackboard to break up your text. We find this is probably one of the big issues with a lot of the documents. When you upload them, it's always talking about headings, and you need to open up these documents in Word and sort of go through and really take a look at how you're navigating through these files. We don't recommend going any further than heading 4, heading 5 or 6. It's just too much. There's too much in that document. Think about cutting that document, chunking the information into 2 documents instead of 1, right? That's a lot of headings for information, right? So we recommend only 4 headings on a document and only 3 headings in Blackboard. Otherwise, you need to sort of chunk out your new items, right? Start a new item, chunk out that information. So for 322, flashing and blinking text are avoided. I've only seen 1 course ever in my sort of 15 years that had a flashing text. Most people do not do this. So this is one that's easy to fulfill. Let's talk about fonts. So we can start off as saying for 323, there is no choice for fonts, right? So WebAIM, all of the guidelines for accessibility, there is no font that's good for everybody. There are some that are close, and we will talk about those, but there really isn't just one that works for everything. So you really need to look and think about the principles that you're taking on when you're doing this font. And so this is font in your documents. We're talking about on-screen documents, and we're talking about Blackboard. So think about fonts that are easily parsed, which means that fonts that break easy from sentence to sentence. It's very simple. It's very clear to read. You want to avoid character complexity, which is some fonts are in script. You don't want to use that for a normal text, right? We're talking about if we go back to our style sheet with normal text, right? You don't want to use a script, right? Nobody does that. But some people use script for headings. And so you want to try to avoid that complexity. Ambiguity. So this is a really good one. When you're talking about ambiguity, sometimes you'll get like a fancy text off of Google, or you see something in Word. And when you look at some of the letters like A, E, and O, sometimes they're difficult to figure out if it's an A or an O. Sometimes you'll see P and G or B and D, very difficult to tell. So that's ambiguity. You want to stay away from fonts where the fonts really look the same and it's hard to tell whether it's an O or an A. You want to use a limited amount of fonts. I suggest 2. No more than 2 in your document. That's nice and clear. And of course, we want to stick with sans serifs. So sans serif fonts means there's no extra, I call them little, they're called ascenders and descenders, and there's little wings on them. So when you have an H, that little line that goes up is called an ascender. And with the Y, a line that goes down is called a descender. With those, thank you.
So
thank you, Kevin. Kevin has a lot of experience with this too, so he is an excellent resource as well. He does, of course, he's doing a lot of the web classes, and of course, he's in computer science. So when you're working with ascenders and descenders, you want to avoid fonts that have really sort of complexity with their little pieces that are hanging off, or have little dots in them. They're extra characters, extra little pieces of the font, and that really makes it hard to read on screen. It causes your eyes to really have trouble reading what it's going on. So you want to stay away from the serif fonts like Times New Roman. Consider spacing and weight. So every font we have has a certain weight and a certain spacing. And the spacing is, we call it, there's 2 spacing. There's the distance between each character in a word, and there's the distance from word to word. And so sometimes you'll get a font that's really condensed, or sometimes you'll get a font that's really expanded. So students who have dyslexia have a hard time reading condensed and expanded fonts or extended fonts. So you want to avoid those. Also, sometimes when you have a font and you bold it, the distance is not really great between each of the words or the letters, and everything starts to blend, especially if it's a small font. And so that's difficult. So you got to really watch that with your fonts. You always want to ensure that high contrast. You can see a lot of my slides are black on white, white on black. That's really the highest contrast, and avoid small font sizes. So some fonts, especially the older fonts like Times New Roman, when they get smaller, when they get really small, like under 12 points, it becomes difficult to read. And I have an example here, I think, on the next slide. So right here in the left hand, you can still read it because it is sans serif, but you could see 12 point is quite small. And then when you start to go under 10 points, of course, it really becomes difficult. When you're using a PowerPoint, you really want to stay at 28 point. I sometimes do between 20 and 28. That's a really good size to sort of use. Everybody in the room can see it. And as well, if you're presenting on Zoom, everybody can read it very clearly what's going on with that. You want to avoid all caps. I'm always talking about this. Not only is it very difficult, you can see right here on the slide, the space between each one of the letters has decreased, as well as the space between the words. So it becomes more and more difficult depending upon what font. I'm using Calibri pretty much for everything. So it's still nice and crisp, but some of the fonts, especially older ones, they don't do well. They start to pixelate at the smaller you go because they're not open. They weren't created with the newest technology, we'll call it, for that. You want to avoid italics. I know we're used to using italics in APA and MLA for certain things, but on screen, italics is very difficult for a student with dyslexia to read. You also want to avoid underlining. Underlining is no longer accepted on a screen document. It is reserved for hyperlinks, and we'll talk about hyperlinks in the future, how to do those correctly. And of course, you want to use bold. So instead of using italics, really use your bold for emphasis. And I know a lot of you have been through this list within EPTO. And so here's our examples, right? These are really some of the suggestions from Microsoft. These are the fonts that you want to avoid. You want to avoid Georgia, New Times Roman, Korean New, things like this. You can see in Georgia, now that we talked about space, look at how close the letters are in Georgia. There's literally none. So the smaller Georgia gets, the worse it's going to look on screen. The same thing with Times New Roman. It's nice and clean, but when you start to reduce, look at how close those letters are. And then again, look at Courier. That Courier is really expanded, right? So it becomes difficult for students with dyslexia and students with vision problems or contrast to really, and see how light Courier is. It's a very light font. So it's really starts to get, when you start putting it in paragraphs, very difficult to read on screen. Here's some good examples: Arial, Calibri, and Verdana. And you can see they're tight, but as you size them up and down, that space will increase and decrease. These are modern fonts designed for the web, for screen use, right? Georgia, Times New Roman, and Courier have been around forever. They've been rebuilt, but still their spacing is really rough when you get small. I know there's faculty too that you can talk to in graphic design in the art department, and they can go into really details about, what font works and what font does. We all still argue about which is the best font. Helvetica is another one that's okay. It's become a little outdated for screens. Calibri is really the one. Microsoft has worked very hard to make this an accessible font at all sizes, and the spacing is pretty good for that. Next, we're going to talk about tables. So OSCQR 324, for 324, when possible, don't use a table. Use a linear format instead. So here I have an example of a table sometimes we use, especially when we're designing schedules in the syllabus, right? We don't really need to have the schedule in a table. It is a great way to organize information, but for accessibility and for students who have vision that are using a screen reader, this is really about screen reader applications. A linear table is much better. So a linear list, and you can see I'm giving the same information in the list as I am in the table. I know the table graphically looks better. But for the screen reader, it's much easier for it to use that linear format. And I've seen some faculty redo their schedules in a linear format, and they've worked out very well. Now let's talk about tables that you actually really need. So these are the tables that are in our journal articles. These are things when you are comparing and contrasting research. There are just sometimes when you really need to show a table or a chart. When that time comes, you need to have header rows and columns assigned so that a student with a screen reader can navigate through an Excel sheet or a table. And what they hear is very different from what we hear. So when they go through a table, they will hear first what row and column it is, before they will hear the information. So if you've ever heard it orally, it's really hard for us, but it's easy for someone who's very experienced. It will actually say row A, column 1, date, row A, column 2, contaminate B, row A, column C, and that's how they have to navigate. So it's very important that they have these header rows, and it has to repeat on every page. So if you have a table that's split between 2 pages, there's a little option in Microsoft Excel, under formatting tables, you click header row on each page, and it then puts the header rows for the screen reader on both pages. And that's right in the toolbar for table layout. And it says header row for each page, and you just click it. For this table, you can see in the example that I have the dates and then in grams of contaminant. I just made this up. It's not real research or anything. I'm just making an example for that. Now, what happens is 325 then asks for a title and summary description for this. And for the summary description, they want a title, which we can see average weight of contaminant B. So every table needs to have its title, and it should be in a header. So I would put it in, depending upon where it is, it needs to be a header, a heading. So it could be heading, 1 or 2, depending upon how you're using this, or 3. And then it needs to have a description. You can see here, I just put in a little description here. It's not a real study or anything. But it tells you exactly what it is. And then just like if you were writing a journal article or research, you need to summarize the results of the table, like what's going on in each column, what is the result of that, just like you were doing in a journal article. So here you the first paragraph, you summarize the table, and then the second paragraph, you give like detailed information about what's going on in the rows and the columns and what it means. This also goes for charts. Any tables, charts, maps is another one where you need to give this paragraph and a title as well. Excellent. So we're at the end here. 326 is just it specifically just calls out this header, this title heading. And that's it for tonight.